With one of the best savings rates in America, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than choosing Slash to be in your band.
Next up for lead guitar. You're in.
Cool.
Yep, even easier than that. And with no fees or minimums on checking and savings accounts, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank for details. Capital One N.A. member FDIC.
Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to the new podcast presented by the female film critics of InSession Film. We are speaking, we love movies, we are Women in Session. I am Kristin Battestella, also writing for I Think That Choir Review. Amy Thomasson is here, our drama teacher by day, InSession film critic by night. We are actually recording this episode on International Women's Day, but instead of all the women's love that we've been sharing, some of our favorite actresses that we've discussed previously, we are getting into a rugged deep dive here with Amy's favorite, William Holden. Amy, I have to admit, we know, I think already, if anyone has listened to some of our previous classic episodes, I am in the Montgomery Clift camp. I feel like there is a little bit of a rivalry between them, an unjust, undeserved impression, I think, but you love William Holden. Why do you love William Holden?
Well, I would also consider myself a Montgomery Clift person. So I think the 50s were just a magical decade that gave us beautiful men giving beautiful performances. And we love them for different reasons. William Holden, part of it is in general, I made my own personal Amy Thomasson top 100 at one point, and I realized he's in a lot of those movies. So Sunset Boulevard, great movie. Network, one of my favorite movies. Bridge on the River Kwai, all of these movies are like top 10, top 25 for me, and he's in all of them. But I got a special connection with William Holden when on my first date with my ex-husband, we watched Stalag 17. And it's a great movie. We're going to talk about it later. And later, when I was pregnant with my son and I was actually in labor, we finally decided that we would name him William Holden. And part of that is we like the name William, and part of it is because we watched Stalag 17 on our first date. And the hospital at which he was born is on Sunset Boulevard in our town, which I didn't realize till we left the hospital. So it's sort of emotional, but he was a great actor. And I think that unlike a Montgomery Clift, Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, he isn't as remembered. When people talk about classic stars off the top of their head, that's kind of who they go to. Yet he's also been in some of like the greatest movies ever made. Academy Awards, groundbreaking films that have stood the test of time that people think of as movies, I think, before they think about him. And we will hopefully dive more into that.
Well, I mean, it's obvious 1950 Sunset Boulevard puts him on the map. I didn't realize he'd been working in Hollywood the entire decade before that, but I don't really think of, as I'm looking at the filmography, none of those movies really jump out at all. So I guess was probably toiling in the studio system, perhaps somewhere. But Sunset Boulevard, of course, written for Montgomery Clift, who in his particularness was like, I'm going to pass. And William Holden sweeps in. Excellent film. For some reason, it's not in my rewatch category. I don't rewatch it very often.
Really?
It's been a while since I've seen it. And I'm not sure why. I don't know. I don't know why.
It is on the Amy Thomasson Top 100. It is. I have 3 movies at number 1. Sunset Boulevard, Gone with the Wind, and Goodfellas.
Broad range.
It is a broad range, but I realized why the character of Joe could have just been give us a hot young guy like Montgomery Clift. The problem with doing that, though, is the character actually has a lot more depth, and I think that Holden gives him that depth. Because while he's supposed to be young and younger, obviously, than Norma Desmond, he is supposed to be old enough to be, jaded by Hollywood. Because the beginning of the movie, he's this hack writer. He's basically like, screw this. I'm not making a career of it. I'm going to sell my car and move back to Ohio or whatever. And so he is bitter and jaded. And then he meets, what is her name in the movie? I can't remember. The Nellie Olson character.
Oh gosh, I don't know.
And she is very young and fresh-faced. So he has to play that line between he's bitter and jaded for the young woman, but he has to be young and hot for the older woman. And he has that cynicism because it's a very cynical movie. And you and I did our Monty Clift episode. No one loves Monty Clift more than me. But I don't think Clift at that point had a lot of that cynicism. He was more like dreamy and idealistic than older and kind of cynical.
Well, how old was Holden around this time? What, 30, 33?
Yeah. He's not super young compared to Gloria Swanson. Yes.
It's funny when you watch things of the past.
Miss Schaefer, Betty Schaefer, that is her name.
I just, think of Nellie Olson getting slapped,
Yes.
But people seemed older back then. You're right. And it was
true.
Montgomery Clift stood out for being such a pretty face, but he's on the map for Sunset Boulevard, nominated for Best Actor. I just said to you, I can't believe Jose Ferrer won for Cyrano de Bergerac instead.
But that year he was also he's in Sunset Boulevard, one of the greatest movies of all time, arguably, and as far as American films go. And that was nominated for Best Picture. And he was in Born Yesterday, a romantic comedy. And he was wonderful in that. And by the way, could he rock a pair of glasses or what? Woo! But two out of the 5 Best Picture nominees. So yeah, that was a really big year for him.
Stewart was also nominated for Harvey, Spencer Tracy for Father of the Bride, and Lewis Calhern for The Magnificent Yankee. So I don't know, was there some vote splitting that went on there?
I have no idea, but I remember reading that just 3 years later, he won for Stalag 17. And he basically thought they're really giving it to me because they didn't give it to me for Sunset Boulevard. He was great in Stalag 17. What are you talking about, William Holden?
Because, like you said, his compatriots of the time, someone like Jimmy Stewart or Spencer Tracy, they're much more recognizable, even when they've played such very different roles, the screwballs to the Westerns
and by the 50s, let's face it, Jimmy Stewart and they were both in movies in the 30s.
Yeah.
They were big. You Can't Take It With You in the 30s. Yeah. Spencer Tracy got both of his Academy Awards in the 30s, Jimmy Stewart in 1940. And by then, he was these guys were old war heroes of film. Spencer Tracy was born old, though. He's like my grandfather. Yeah. He looks like an old man when he was like 20.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. William Holden is in this class with these people, and you're right. He is largely forgotten. It seems weird to say, but that's true. Even though he continued to work steady for the next 30 years. Literally right up until
exactly. And continuing to do big work. It's not like they put him in these little frivolous roles. People think some of the best American movies, Sunset Boulevard, Network, the Sam Peckinpah film.
Oh, The Wild Bunch.
The Wild Bunch. Yes. A groundbreaking movie. Bridge on the River Kwai. It's like people think of those movies and you have to be like, William Holden was in that. Because people think Bridge on the River Kwai, they think Alec Guinness. But William Holden's is half of that movie. And I can say this because I watch that movie every couple of months.
Oh, drama, war movies. So, of course, Stalag 17. We discussed Montgomery Clift previously. But again, do we have a split voting issue with From Here to Eternity with Burt Lancaster? I enjoy Stalag 17, but it's like, but From Here to Eternity is right there.
True. Yet, but also possibly because From Here to Eternity also won Best Picture. Maybe they were trying to spread the wealth. And I think more people need to see Stalag 17 because it is actually a great movie. And one of the things I was so excited about is I realized that not only do I get to talk about William Holden, I get to talk about Billy Wilder. Hey.
Oh, yes. We could do a whole other series on Billy Wilder as well.
Like a 10-part series.
It's funny. 1953 also was Marlon Brando for Julius Caesar. I don't like that version of Julius Caesar at all. And Richard Burton for The Rope. They were the other nominees. Which,
I mean, really.
Richard Burton, I like in films where it's okay for him to be ridiculously over the top. And The Rope is one of those films, but I don't know if it's Best Actor worthy. I don't really think so.
I wouldn't have been heartbroken if it had. I wouldn't have given it to Lancaster. I would have given it to Holden or Montgomery Clift. But in my version of the world, Montgomery Clift won it in 1951 for A Place in the Sun, which is my personal favorite because he doesn't have to share the spotlight with anybody. Because he's Monkey Clift. I don't like him I don't like my man having to share the spotlight.
I feel like when people, if they mention William Holden, yes, Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, maybe people will know and say The Wild Bunch, but there's a lot in between there. I mean, even right after Stalag 17, you have Executive Suite and Sabrina.
Another classic. Billy Wilder really knew how to use him, and he plays such different characters in those films.
Is that what it is?
Was the decade of William Holden, because if you look at the Best Picture nominees from the 1950s, he's in at least one, pretty much every single year.
But is that because he's not recognizable? That he changes his looks? See, I don't feel like he does.
Because he doesn't. No, he doesn't. And he always plays he does generally play someone a little bitter and cynical, except in Sabrina, where he's so charming. And you could so see that his chemistry with Audrey Hepburn, because they were in love, and that easy chemistry. And both of them, I mean, and Audrey Hepburn, let's be real, she had chemistry with everybody. But especially I always thought Gregory Peck, you could just feel that natural warmth that they really did have for each other. And that they put William Holden and Sabrina up against Humphrey Bogart, who was a very similar, jaded, cynical, around the same age kind of guy. Yet he does play David Larrabee with such charm and finesse. They make his hair like blonde for whatever reason.
Now, Sabrina, Stalag 17, and Sunset Boulevard are on our Mr. J. Ledbetter's Billy Wilder countdown at InSessionFilm.com. However, our Miss Zita Short has also written about Love is a Many Splendor Thing, her being the Miss
Jennifer Jones fan.
But it's an atrocious movie.
It's real painful to watch.
Did he shoot himself in the foot because you have Love is a Many Splendor Thing and Picnic back to back?
He did that. Like I said, the man was in almost every Best Picture nominee.
I mean, in some ways you feel like he's so prolific, he shows up in everything that it doesn't matter. Oh, it's William Holden, how cool. But then he bounces back anyway. The Bridge on the River Kwai, like just keep doing the work, and bam, you hit classics.
And he works exactly. So he does, he does the paycheck jobs. Yet when those movies came out, they were massive hits. They're kind of forgotten now, but Bridge on the River Kwai is not. Bridge on the River Kwai is, in my opinion, like one of the best war movies of all time. And he's amazing in it. But yeah, Love is a Many Splendor Thing. And I'm the person in the world who enjoys the movie Picnic because I really like William Inge and Rosalind Russell. The scene with him and Kim Novak is very erotic, and he's not a dancer, and he felt so awkward doing that scene. But it really worked. He was a very handsome man in a very 1950s way. He was very rugged and very manly, but he also had a soft side, like you saw in Love Is a Many Splendored Thing and the world of Susie Wong, which I might be the only person on the planet who likes that movie. So
the way you worded it, taking the roles for the paycheck, but you know, we have to put on our 50s thinking cap. I mean, how much of that was probably being loaned out on a contract or obligated to do a movie? Who knows? The Country Girl, he's also in there too. It just seems
also
like
nominated for Best Picture. I mean, like I said,
and everything, but always, I don't want to say not perceived as the leading man, but I mean, like, what's he, third, fourth build in that? You know, like, oh no, that's the Bing Crosby kind of vehicle types. I just feel like I keep coming back to, I guess everybody knows the Jimmy Stewart, you know, golly gee shucks kind of thing, even though he played in drastically different genres. And William Holden, I guess people always expect, I don't know, a consistent sturdiness.
Rugged, exactly. That's strong, rugged, masculine, yet not in the same kind of way. And he was in Westerns. Like, The Wild Bunch isn't some nothing Western. That's considered a groundbreaking masterpiece. And he was in it. Network is considered one of the greatest movies ever made. One of the best screenplays of all time. Isn't when Aaron Sorkin won his Academy Award, he brought up Patty Chayefsky's Network when he won. I mean, this isn't enough. These aren't nothing movies. And yet he was able to adapt into all these different new groundbreaking writers and directors. David Lean, several Billy Wilder films, Sam Peckinpah. He's really had a great career. And like I said, I don't know why he's not as much of a Jimmy Stewart. And I remembered when I had mentioned to my ex-husband wanting to name William Holden, he's like, it would, you know, I don't want naming our kids after movie stars to be our shtick. And I said, it's not like we're naming him Leonardo DiCaprio. You know what I mean? I said, William Holden isn't going to be such a, oh, you named him after a movie star. I said, the only people who would know that are people who know me very well. And it would make sense. And by the way, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter on Vivian Lee's birthday. And so I thought, if it's a girl, wouldn't it be great if we can name her Vivian Lee Thomasson? And he's like, that's not going to be our thing. And I said,
You're preaching unfortunate here. Preaching to the choir. I'm named after Who Shot JR. Which years when people wondered how I spelled my name, I just said like Who Shot JR. Oh, okay. And then I remember, I think I've told JD this story maybe. I was at a hockey clinic coaching and a mother and daughter came to register and her name was Kristin. I said, that's my name, like Who Shot JR. And the mom went, oh yeah. And the girl went, who? And I thought, it's happened. I'm old. I can't use that reference anymore. Yeah. And last year when I went to vote, and I had to spell my name. And I said, I used to say Who Shot JR. Nobody knows what that means anymore. And the old lady looked at me and she goes, you don't look old enough to be named after Dallas. And I was like, well,
oh, yes. She was your new best friend.
So sure, old references are just fine to me. That's fine. I don't know that I don't think I'd name my son Montgomery. That's a little weird.
No, and that was the thing when I was like, Edward Albee was another one because we both really like Edward Albee. For some reason, it was weird that we watched Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf like all the time.
but you know, I have to say though, because I don't really think I'll ask you if your son likes William Holden movies, because I can't really think of any that are child friendly.
No, I think I showed him like a scene from Stalag 17 and I showed him some pictures. But I'd like him to see those movies, like Sunset Boulevard eventually, just because again, they're classics. If you're studying American film, like, again, you do not get better than Billy Wilder or David Lean. Like I said, Bridge on the River Kwai, such a great movie.
Kind of going chronologically, we're kind of bouncing around, but I remember when the Wild Bunch first came out with the quote X-rated version on VHS, and I couldn't go in and get it. I had to have my father go in and get it for me, and I'm looking at this, as a kid in the 80s, why is this X-rated? I mean, there's a couple topless chicks in like a hot tub or something, and there's a lot of violence, which was absolutely shocking, groundbreaking at the time, and compared to what's out today, you're like, this is nothing,
what a cast,
which is surprising. It was excellent film, lovely film. And again, I don't want to say, you always think of him rugged in the 50s, like this risque, shirt off, but with, pants in the waist all the way, hiked all the way up.
Yeah.
50s, like bulging repression or something. But I always tend to think of him in the Wild Bunch as like the last hurrah. And then he still continued to work for another 10 years. But it's
really,
real powerhouse kind of stand-up kind of guy, so I don't know why he's forgotten, but
yes, shirtless. If you watch enough of his movies in the 50s, you'll realize those directors and women, that was a little eye candy for the ladies. I think one of the best directorial decisions David Lean has was to have him shirtless for most of Bridge on the River Kwai, because really there's not a lot there for the ladies. I love it, but but in Picnic, when they actually like rip his shirt off and they're all like,
and Zeta would cry foul because it's like so stage like if that's the most scandalous thing, a man getting his shirt ripped off, whoop-de-doo.
It's so funny, but he really does have that sexual charisma, because I think it seems very natural and not like he's trying to be smooth. He's, you know what I mean? He doesn't play the smooth talker. He's kind of rough.
I don't feel like he did a couple romantic kind of things, but I don't feel like, maybe this is devil's advocate, did he use that kind of romantic leading man to full advantage, or was he kind of actually sort of strapped by being stuck in the 50s?
I think that's true. He didn't do a lot in the 60s, did he?
Not.
Like, you think of William Holden, I think of the entire 50s, because that's when he was most prolific. He wasn't like a Paul Newman that did a bunch of movies in every decade.
Anybody else, I would say, what do you think the decade they did best? But with him, it's easy to just say literally the 50s, every year in the 50s.
It still came back to do these groundbreaking, greatest movies of all time.
But even in the 60s, he still bounces around in a lot of different things. That little moment in Casino Royale. But then again, to me, it's like, you made the Wild Bunch in 1969. That's enough for the entire decade of 1969.
That's all he had to do. Like, if you're going to make one movie, make it a groundbreaking masterpiece. And then he did Network in the 70s.
But you were trying to explain to me, we'll diverge here briefly, that he makes an appearance as himself on I Love Lucy. I'm a Golden Girls reference. I don't like I Love Lucy.
Which, if you have to watch an episode though, because it's, I watched it when I was younger, but then I watched it again once my little resurgence came up. And he's so charming. And she's at the Brown Derby with Ethel and Fred, and William Holden comes in, and it also just shows it reminds you why she was such a brilliant comedian, because of course, what's the most awkward thing that you could eat and try to look subtle and cool? Spaghetti. So she's got this mountain of spaghetti, and she's trying to subtly like look over at him, and you just see her continuing to twist the fork with the spaghetti on it. And she's looking at him and looking at him over the partition between the tables. And then she ends up with this like mountain of spaghetti on her fork. And then she's eating. And then William Holden's talking to the waiter, and he's like, I think I get tired of being stared at. I can never just eat in peace. I wonder what people would feel like if I did that to them. So he moves this plant and he puts his face on it, and he's just watching Lucy as she's eating, and she's trying to not look at him, and she's all awkward, and she's eating the spaghetti, and it gets like stuck from her mouth all the way down to the plate, but she's trying to smile and like act all normal, and Ethel pulls a pair of scissors out of her purse and like cuts the spaghetti, and it's just such a hoot, and she just makes such a fool out of herself. And then later on, of course, Desi brings William Holden back to the hotel room to meet Lucy. Lucy freaks out. She puts on this like prosthetic nose, and she's talking to William Holden, and she's lighting a cigarette, and she lights the end of her nose on fire, and she's twisted, and then she tries to put it out, and it's just so hysterical.
All trying to impress William Holden. And this is
trying to hide the fact that she's the one at the Brown Derby who made him like fall, or she spilled something on him. And so she's trying to hide and not be who she is. And then finally, like, he realizes who it is, and he totally covers for her, and she kisses him. And then she goes, I just kissed Bill Holden. And she faints away. And there's just a lot of very funny physical comedy there. And it was very cute.
This is early TV, still mid 50s. So it's like people in the 50s were aware of how great William Holden was then.
Yeah.
And I think he did a couple other little small appearances on other things here and there, but it's like within his lifetime, people were, like you keep saying, Bill Holden's the best. Barbara Stanwyck, oh my God, Bill Holden, so great. Everybody seemed to love him within his time, but it's like, how he got forgotten.
There was a Seinfeld episode where George he's at dinner with a couple, and the woman sneezes, and the husband doesn't say God bless you, so he says God bless you. Do you remember this episode? Yes. And he's like, well, I knew this guy wasn't going to say anything. And then the woman starts coming on to George, and Elaine says to George, married women don't have male friends, they have affairs. And he's like, affairs? It sounds so adult. Affairs are like stockings and martinis and William Holden. And that line has always stuck out to me. But yeah, he's a grown-up.
I have to discuss, because I feel like people in the know will recognize, like when we're talking about William Holden, but that whatever year it was, 69 or 70 Oscars, he's not nominated for The Wild Bunch, which annoys me. I think the Wild Bunch, as I'm looking here, was only nominated for original screenplay that year, which I beg to differ. I mean, that's the year, I guess, of Midnight Cowboy and of 1,000 Days. If you had to choose between which was a better picture, we just discussed this on our most hated Best Picture nominees. Hello, Dolly gets a nomination for Best Picture over The Wild Bunch. Wait, hold on here. And we just discussed this. Hello, Dolly feels like it comes 10 years too late. And then you have a movie here, Peckinpah, the X rating, the blood, the shock, the cynicism.
You can only handle one X-rated Best Picture of the year at a time.
Just bringing the decade literally into the 70s. So again, we have, I guess, the Academy not yet. We're not ready for that. We're not ready for that kind of thing. But that's also the year John Wayne gets the makeup Oscar for True Grit, I'm sure.
Over Dustin Hoffman, right.
Let's see.
Do not even start me on that.
Anne of 1,000 Days, Richard Burton here popping up again. I like Anne of 1,000 Days because to me it's like, oh, what kind of role, what kind of boisterous, over-the-top, ridiculous, larger-than-life person could Richard Burton be? Oh, well, Henry VIII, of course.
But it's like, enough with the Richard Burton and the costume. We have Beckett. He played them all.
The irony. I like Beckett because I feel like that's one of his most subdued performances.
I love it. No, I love Beckett. And of course, because him and friggin' Peter O'Toole are such a hoot. Their chemistry is like off the charts. But the fact that really, we can all say this. Well, no, it is hard. I almost said it's a crime he didn't win for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but he was up against Paul Scofield, and that's really tough because I can't say Paul Scofield was like a crap winner because he really wasn't.
Beautiful School was nominated for Goodbye, Mr. Chips that year. Dustin Hoffman and John Voight probably split the vote for Midnight Cowboy.
Which honestly, either one of them could have gotten it and I'd be okay.
But just looking back at this, like, wow, William Holden did not, you would think, off the bat, you want to say, oh, he won for the Wild Bunch, right? It's maybe that's what it is. If people
or Sunset Boulevard.
If people broadly know of William Holden, me playing devil's advocate again, at first you're like, oh my God, yeah, he had to have won for the Wild Bunch, right? And it's like, well, no. And then you're like, people would say, well, he won for Stalag 17. And then you're like, wait, what? Over From Here to Eternity? And then you see Sunset Boulevard and you're like, whoa, wait, he didn't win for this?
It's extremely strange. And sometimes, like I said, he got pretty much ignored for Bridge on the River Kwai, which when I posted to our audience members what things that they loved, a lot of them said Stalag 17 was one of their favorites, Bridge on the River Kwai, Sunset Boulevard, and someone did mention the Lucy episode. So thank you, audience members, for contributing. I also have some quotes here for some fellow podcasters about William Holden. Some that he was very sexy. And I'm, of course, trying to find this now in my Twitter feed. Oh, here we go.
Today he would be on one of those late night shows reading thirst tweets.
Yes, Mr. Jay Ledbetter totally did not remember he won the Oscar for Stalag 17, deserved. He did also, Jay Ledbetter, absolute stud muffin in Sabrina. He rocks. He's the leader of the Wild Bunch after all. Another quote.
He's a fan, isn't he?
Yes. Charming as hell. His performances in both Sunset Boulevard and Network are incredible and my absolute favorites. Someone else. He's hot in Sunset Boulevard. He's old, hot in Network. He understood the assignments.
Yes,
these are direct quotes.
We have been getting some kind of a little bit of love on Twitter. Thank you for everyone who listens, retweets.
Oh, yes.
Shares, lots of views. I have no idea if it's when we talk about some of these Oscar complaints or if people, love hearing us talk about our favorites or love hearing us when we hate on a topic. But thank you for, I don't understand what any of those algorithm numbers mean, but thank you. And side note, you can see, hear, and read Mr. Jay Ledbetter because the InSessionFilm.com podcast is also on YouTube. So that's really wonderful too. You can send your love for William Holden.
Yes, please do.
Also to Mr. Jay Ledbetter and see his reactions on YouTube. But Miss Zeta Shorts, again, does not have love for the Towering Inferno. Which I can't hate the Towering Inferno.
I've never seen it.
Really? It's one of those.
Or like the Poseidon Adventure.
Yeah, like the 70s, airport, put all the celebrities in the disaster movie kind of things. Earthquake, I can't hate on it. I mean, Paul Newman, William Holden. Who else is in this?
Who isn't in it is the better question.
Can't hate on it. And that's, what is that, 70, 73, I think, mid 70s? I don't know. But then you get, of course, Huge Network, which he's nominated for Network.
Yes. And honestly, I think he should have won.
Yeah.
Over Peter Finch. And all due respect to Peter Finch.
Well,
but
again, here's the thing. On one hand, it's like, yes, William Holden should have won for Network, not Peter Finch. But that's the same year that Robert De Niro is nominated for Taxi Driver. Sylvester Stallone is nominated for Rocky. It's just, was just the
most competitive year ever. One of the best years where every movie is amazing. But Finch had the showier role and he got to do the whole "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore" monologue. I mean, that monologue is going to win you awards. It's just a fact that you're going to get an award for that. But William Holden and not just his scenes with Faye Dunaway, but his scenes with Beatrice Straight, when she gives that monologue, which gets her the Oscar. And then afterwards, though, he has a response to her, like, this isn't going to work out. And he plays it out like it's a story, and this is what's going to happen, and this is what's going to happen. And it's this guy who in the 1950s was this hot hunk who was, he's shirtless and he's a good looking guy. And all of a sudden he has all this real gravitas, and he's giving a very, very moving, thought-provoking performance. And it's really astonishing that he was able to go from almost being at quote unquote just a heartthrob to giving a performance like that, because it's really extremely powerful.
It's interesting to see the mid 50s, Style Like 17, real solid war story kind of. And then you get to Network, edgy kind of within kind of through the lens of television channel, and the cynicism of the 70s. And you have, the same man in both of them. And it's like just the drastic differences of the times there, indicative in his roles, which is really great. And then, of course, he's in the horror movie too, the Damien movie, which is kind of fun. Yeah. Literally worked until he died.
And he had an awful, memorable death, which was immortalized in that song Tom Steiner.
I feel like he was always old in a way. But
yes, he's like Spencer Tracy.
Yeah, but I feel like that's just, I don't know, the 50s kind of stylings. I don't know.
No, because I feel like Montgomery Clift always looked young.
Yeah. Well, up until...
Like, if you look at him in The Heiress and you look at him in The Misfits, he doesn't really... He still has that face, even when he had that broken face. That's what I call it, his broken face.
76 or 77. Best Picture was Rocky. But then you also had All the President's Men, Taxi Driver, Bound for Glory. Sidney Lumet was nominated for Best Director. It's like this whole, the new wave of cinema kind of coming along. And he's still, maybe in some ways was almost... not the last of the old guard, but was just...
He was, though.
Because I feel like Jimmy Stewart lived longer, but did a lot of those 80s kind of television kind of appearances, I feel.
Oh, yeah. He did his time with, what's his name? Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show.
Yeah. Have you seen The Blue Knight? Because I don't know if it's available.
Have I heard of The Blue Light? No, I have not. The Blue Knight. I have not heard of it. He
won an Emmy for it, for like TV movies, which, I love those movies. Like every once in a while you can kind of catch them on like Tubi or like the Amazon Freebie, where they're like, there's 90-minute kind of TV, like movie of the weeks from like ABC.
Well, those were really good in the 80s. They got these amazing actors to be in them. And that, of course, brings me to his relationship with Barbara Stanwyck, who was in the Thornbirds in the 80s. And boy, did I watch the hell out of that miniseries. I wasn't allowed to watch the whole thing, but my mom sure did. But
you would have totally loved that if it was William Holden in the Thornbirds.
No one, and I say this as someone, I read that book once a year, and I have since I was a freshman in high school. Richard Chamberlain is the only human being who could have played that part, because that role in the book, he had to be so almost like painful to look at because he was supposed to be so beautiful. In the 80s, I love William Holden. That was not William Holden. That was Richard Chamberlain in his prime, my friend. But Barbara Stanwyck was great. But she was very good friends with our William Holden. And she apparently helped save his career. And when she had to present, and everyone go to YouTube and look this up because you can find it, she is about to present and he basically stops her and says to the entire audience that, like, without Barbara Stanwyck, he wouldn't have a career because she was his champion when he almost got fired off the movie The Golden Boy. And if you watch it, it's so genuine because she really looks like startled because she's such a professional. And she's reading and she's doing all the things, and she stopped and she's really taken it back, and he hugs her, and it's this beautiful, beautiful moment. And then years later, when she got the honorary Oscar, because she never won a competitive Oscar, that's a whole nother rant. she thanked him, and he had died. I think he had died that year. She said he'd always wanted her to win an Oscar, and she dedicated, she goes, to my golden boy. And of course, every time I watch this clip, I cry because that's how I am.
I guess the big ones are probably readily available. Network, The Wild Bunch, Sunset Boulevard, Horse Soldiers, Bridge on the River Kwai. But I feel like a lot of his filmography is probably just not lost, officially lost when we think of silent film lost.
Because you can still, but you can still, Picnic is easy to find. Love is a Many Splendor thing. I've been able to see all those, and I don't have really, I'm special access. They're all definitely available on DVD.
I was going to say, are you a collector? I've got my Montgomery Clift shelf.
Of course.
Because, in some ways, if you don't own the DVD, these films cease to exist, which is really unfair, because when you effectively want to look at someone who had a consistent body of work such as this, you can't see everything. Yeah, Sabrina, I guess, is you can find.
Yeah, all the Billy Wilder stuff.
Mm-hmm. Do you prefer him in the Westerns, the war movies, the rhythm?
I'm not a huge Western fan in general, but two of my favorite movies of his are Bridge on the River Kwai, which is, like I said, probably one of the greatest war movies of all time. And someone commented on Twitter that he was so good in that part because Alec Guinness is like so the embodiment of England. Like, he's so British in that movie and everything you imagine about the British. And Holden was a great foil as, I'm here for myself. I want to survive. I want to get out of here. And, he doesn't understand the British guy who's all about rules and conduct and order, and we're representatives of the empire and all this. And William Holden's like, I just want to survive the war, dude. So, like, you do you, I'll do me. But he was such a good good foil for Guinness's character, and Guinness won the Academy Award, which is why everyone remembers him.
Well, no, Star Wars.
Yeah, but for the rest of us.
No, that's what I was thinking, is that he progressed into the elder sage kind of role that gave him the extra lasting memorable. But then you think, but he was early 60s when he died. Not Alec Guinness, William Holden.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think he would have done had he lived?
I don't know. I think he might have done some TV, but with the way that he lived, I don't think he was ever going to live a long, long life. He was a future girl. And that's how he died. And it's awful. I didn't realize until today that Montgomery Clift was 45 when he died. I was like, that's kind of close to where I'm like, that's young.
What could have been.
But he lived a hard life.
But somehow managed to consistently make great movies. So
great movies. Like, if you're only going to make 2 movies in a decade, like, and one of them's network, like, you're doing pretty well.
I mean, I guess if he were not clean, healthy, wise, that he could have, I don't want to say like Julie Christie, almost been able to pick and choose. Here's where I'm going to have my uncle.
Yeah.
Here's going to be, like maybe more like the way Paul Newman kind of gravitated into things like Twilight and the road to Paul Newman's Twilight, not, today's Twilight.
Starting off the 80s with The Verdict. I mean,
which
is one of his best roles.
Yes.
Say that about Paul Newman is a lot, because Paul Newman's career pretty much is his best roles.
Yeah, I guess choosing to be able to do some kind of prestige, maybe because he didn't have 80s appearances. I think maybe the more recent generations, have forgotten about Holden. Like you say, the Seinfeld references, that's a slightly different, slightly earlier kind of age, but older as earlier. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Us oldsters.
Yep.
You called him rugged, even in the 50s, having that kind of masculinity that was sort of pushing a little bit of a sexual, like, he's a man of action that's going to get the job done, even if he kind of looks old. But that like today, we're just so obsessed with youth, and that annoys me. Like you look like you could take responsibility and kick ass up until the very end, like the Wild Bunch. Are there any rugged men like comparable today?
I think men are handsome in a different kind of a way, because back then men who were in shape because it looked like they did things like chop wood and carry things and build things, and it was from that kind of thing. It wasn't, I'm going to do crunches and do low carb to have a perfect six-pack. Not that I'm complaining about a six-pack, or as I like to call it, the Brad Pitt.
No, they've got like 8-packs, 12-packs.
Yeah, he just looked strong, and like he could like chop down that tree in your yard. And
in the 50s, there was no such thing as the V because the pants came up.
Pants came up so high, but I would still say Brad Pitt. But still in a very different way. He's very, I don't know, he's very of the 50s, but
even like you said,
I think he has a timeless, but he also has a timeless look, because I was thinking about that, because men in the 50s, the way that they looked, and I thought, and earlier, 50s and earlier men, it's still kind of, by contemporary standards, could still look very hot. There's a picture of Montgomery Clift in the 50s where he's literally just wearing like a white V-neck shirt. And it looks like it could be an ad today, because even by modern sensibilities, he's still hot. But if you look at like Warren Beatty in Shampoo, he's very 1970s. And he almost looks silly now when you watch that movie, because that shag haircut he had, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's very like, he looked handsome for the 70s. Now it looks ridiculous.
You make me think of someone like Burt Lancaster, who started out in like all the acrobat kind of circus kind of stuff. And but had that really hard physique.
Yes.
And maybe the difference is you could tell in the 50s when somebody was just like the square jawed, like Western good guy cowboy who was just there to be pretty, the dimple in the chin type thing, compared to the people who could really act. As opposed to today, where we have like people who just stand there and look pretty, and it's not necessarily about them acting. Stand there and we'll make some special effects all around you.
It is. And a lot of times, even in the 50s, though, it seems like he was, and in Sunset Boulevard again, it's the Gloria Swanson show. Let's call it what it is. That Dorma Desmond is, everything centers around her. So you can see why, again, it seems like the Joe Gillis character, and even on Broadway, it's always, who's going to play Norma Desmond? Who's going to be Norma Desmond? No one's like, who's going to play Joe Gillis? But when you watch it again, and I do recommend that you watch it again if you haven't seen it, it is not an easy role. And he really brought a lot of depth to that. And again, network. When you watch it, you're like, oh, that's almost forgot that he was in it. Because all you really remember is Peter Finch and the I'm as mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. Even if you have never seen that movie, you know that line because you've heard it 117,000 times. So maybe that's something that happened. Bridge on the River Kwai. You remember Alec Guinness and the Colonel Saito and their whole standoff.
Did you?
But you forget that William Holden's like half of the film.
Did you write about Bridge on the River Kwai for InSession Film?
Not yet.
One of your nominated or not nominated lists?
No, because they were all nominated. Yeah. I wrote about that year, possibly.
Okay. You haven't done, I'm shocked. You haven't done a top 10 William Holden.
I'm also shocked. As I'm thinking this, I'm like, I need to get that done.
You're behind. You need to do the Amy Adams love. Now you have to do William Holden. We have to get these things confirmed in writing.
Yes. But no, you know what it was? I think we're thinking because in 1959, I talked about how Stephen Boyd for Ben-Hur wasn't nominated, but like Hugh Griffith was nominated and won. And Joey Brown from Some Like It Hot was not nominated. And he was amazing in that movie.
That's another one.
Now we're really getting off topic.
That's one of these years. That's okay, where everything was still spoiled for choice. And he had the Horse Soldiers, I guess, was up in there at some point.
And yet Some Like It Hot.
I'm surprised John Wayne and William Holden didn't work together more. Were they?
I didn't know that they did they?
And they're in the Horse Soldiers together, but I feel like that's it. Because you would think either were they too much alike, because Jimmy Stewart's in a handful with John Wayne, but they're able to have a different dynamic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could you narrow it down, your 10 out of your 100 ever a favorite film list?
I would say the William Holden movies that are on my top 100 are Sunset Boulevard, which is, like I said, it's tied for 3 for number 1. Network, Bridge on the River Kwai. I mean, these are movies I watch at least once a year, sometimes multiple times. Stalag 17. Those are 4 solids that I can think of off the top of my head. I love Bridge on the River Kwai. Do not mention, it's a bad movie to mention to me because I could talk about that movie for like 100 years.
Because I would say Network and The Wild Bunch. It's at the same time we could easily like run off his
And this isn't just like and those aren't just like my favorite William Holden movies. We're talking movie as in the entirety that I absolutely love, and he is in them. But they're also some of my favorite roles. Man, the end of Bridge on the River Kwai, I don't care how many times I see it. When that bridge is up and he's starting to look at the water, the editing of that, I'm still at the edge of my seat. It's David Lean at his best. When David Lean is at his best, he's one of the best of all time.
What year was
1957.
7, because
it was up against 12 Angry Men.
But I don't think of it as a 50s film. It just seems, I don't know, bigger cinematic, or almost, I would say it's more like 67 than 57.
Yeah, it's really ahead of its time. And it's also one of the reasons why it's so good and why David Lean classics are what they are and why you could never make them again is the naturalism. Sam Spiegel literally bought a train. They built a bridge and they blew it up. It was not, Lawrence of Arabia. No, they actually went to the desert and like set the cameras up and like got on the camels and had to run through the desert. This was not, folks at home, we're hoping to maybe do a David Lean episode at one point. So
I was just going to say, we just keep adding topics to our list. Billy Wilder, David Lean. At some point, we have to talk about Howard Hawks and John Huston.
Yes, but Billy Wilder really knew what he was capable of. And I love that. I love that he put him as Joe Gillis, this bitter cynic. I love that he put him as a bitter cynic in Stalag 17. And apparently he did not want to play that part because he thought his character was this awful person, totally selfish, totally self-absorbed, always kept asking Billy Wilder, can't we soften him up? Can't we do this? And Billy Wilder was like, that's going to be no. You're going to do it exactly as it's written. And he ended up getting his Academy Award. And I found out today when I watched a clip it was so cute, of Ben Mankiewicz on TCM on the 30 Days of Oscar I saw on YouTube. Because I watched a lot of clips today talking about, and when Billy Wilder tells you to do something, it's usually in your best interest to listen to Billy Wilder. Like, do what he says. But the part at the end of the movie, when he goes in, when he's like, the next time if we ever see each other on the streets, like, just pretend we don't know each other. And he goes down the hole, but then he comes back up and has this grin and gives them a salute and then goes back down. That I think was like a last minute, like, let's give him that moment. And it's iconic. It's so good.
I feel like this is probably a larger debate, but that idea of an actor's director, I almost feel like is a thing of the past, because now we have directors who are known for, the epics, the sci-fi, all the Marvel and all kinds of special effects, like big vehicle, a Michael Bay film types, where it's not about, it's about like the time is money. We'll fix it in post. We have to have all the effects go off at the same time and make sure you get your line and that's it. We got it. Or we can ADR it, correct it later, as opposed to, let's have one more take. Let's do something different. Let's let the camera roll. Let's let the actor get warmed up and do what they have to do. So it's ironic in some ways. I don't feel like William Holden would do good today.
No, maybe not. Because it's hard because he would be an action star, and it's hard to find an action star. I think he'd get pigeonholed.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have a Billy Wilder who would be like, hey, you know what? Let's put him in the army. Let's make him a young hot guy sleeping with an older woman. Let's get or Sidney Lumet with, let's give him this really cerebral character.
I don't have the opportunity for that today. I think he'd be, the grandpa, the uncle, the older mentor type. I don't think that he would have any of the provocative kind of middle age kind of leading man kind of role.
It's also, and it's also hard because in reality, he wouldn't have aged well. And that's tragic. There's so many actors, especially, and some of the ones who died young, where I feel like I don't think they would have aged well, and I don't think we would remember them the same way. And I like James Dean. I feel like James Dean would not have aged well. Marilyn Monroe, I do not think would have aged well.
I said this before. This is why I'm not so adored, beloved of Marlon Brando, because I saw what happened to him later, and then went back and saw things like A Streetcar Named Desire, and I'm like, but
and
knowing what he becomes.
And like I said, James Dean and Marilyn Monroe, would they still be as iconic had they lived? And we kind of see what happens to them as they age, and with the way that they were living.
Maybe not.
Not everyone ages like Sidney Poitier and Paul Newman. Like, that's just a fact. I mean, Sidney Poitier, until the day he died, was one of the most beautiful men who ever lived.
And today the men are allowed to age gracefully and be rugged, where the women are not. There's probably another debate. Men are able to have this graduate from leading man to being the supporting kind of character actor. And again, women don't. Women age out and become like mom roles, which is stupid, a separate issue. But it's funny because on one hand, you almost don't want to define William Holden as a leading man, because it's like, but you feel like he was also a character actor.
He was, but when I think of him, I think leading man. But that reminds me about women in First Wives Club, when Goldie Hawn said there's 3 ages of women in Hollywood: babe, district attorney, and driving Miss Daisy.
Yeah.
And it's sad. That movie is, of course, in my mind, that's a recent film because I'm old, and in reality, that's much older than I like to admit.
I know Miss Zeta will be talking about Sidney Pollack in the future. And it's so funny because I immediately thought of his little moment in Death Becomes Her. And then it occurred to me again with all the Bruce Willis things happening, sadly. And I was thinking like, oh, wait, it's not a new movie. Is it? No, it's not. Maybe because he died young, I guess, like I said, William Holden felt very more of the past than I guess some of those old stars who lived longer into the 80s. But it's a shame, I guess, that I feel like he's a little more forgotten. But he had, some really great memorable films. I mean, everybody can put out, I guess, the 5 big ones or something that we said. Now you have to write about them.
Yeah.
Do you have any more final thoughts on William Holden, Mr. Rugged?
If I could say this, I would say go back and watch some of his movies, because he really is a great leading man. He's kind of everything that you need. He could be romantic, and he could be, cynical, and, you believe that he could have escaped the prison in Bridge on the River Kwai, and he does.
He's someone that America could root for in, post-war times, which I guess certainly explains a lot of his popularity of the time. And I guess as the times changed, we didn't need somebody like that anymore, and the films slowly disappear. Just sad.
But he's not forgotten. He lives on in the sake of my son.
The way now, previously you ended our things. Kate Winslet, call us. Amy Adams, call us. We're gonna have a seance now.
We do. Or any audience members who have things that they would like to say, like, hey, I thought he was hot. Hey, Alex saw something. A lot of these are also very, I used to watch this movie with my dad.
That's not a bad thing.
And I like that because I think there are certain movies that I associate with dads. One of them is The Great Escape, because I feel like everybody's like, oh, my dad loves this movie. And it's like everyone's dad loves that movie. Steve McQueen is kind of the same way.
Like I said, back in the day when it was had to go to the video store to get some of these classic movies, and it was like, oh, Dad, go get me into the X-rated movies.
Yes. Everyone's dad loves The Great Escape. Everyone's dad loves Bridge on the River Kwai. Hey,
Crunch.
In Parks and Rec, very popular show, on more than one episode, Ron Swanson says his favorite movie is Bridge on the River Kwai.
Ron Swanson.
And two separate, exactly. But I'm such a nerd, but it makes me laugh. But if you know Ron Swanson and you've seen Bridge on the River Kwai, that absolutely makes sense for his character. And he watches the movie on his birthday. Leslie sets up the whole screening for him to watch it.
Well, now, dare I ask you then, two final questions, because he was very Reagan-ish, wasn't he? William Holden.
Reagan-ish. He was best man at Reagan's wedding to Nancy.
I mean, again, another.
Did it shatter me a little bit? It absolutely shattered me.
You know,
I was like, seriously, dude.
I don't think he was as far as Charlton Heston, pry this gun from my cold dead hands.
No.
Okay. So, because again, sometimes you wonder what some of these classic folks, you're like, no, I like that they are there, and that's their.
But maybe that's another good reason why he passed when he did, because had he gone on longer, we don't know.
Like Charlton Heston,
which is sad, because Charlton Heston was one of those. Not my personal favorite. However, he fits into that category of the roles that he played. No one else could have played them. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he was this amazing. Yeah, I don't think he was this amazing, versatile actor. However, no one could have done Moses like him. Nobody could have done Ben-Hur like him. No one could have been in the Planet of the Apes like him. You needed Charlton Heston to make those movies work. And Charlton Heston was apparently one of the suggestions for Stalag 17 before they came up with William Holden. But they thought he's too good. He's too good. And you needed a little bit of that cynicism. So call William Holden.
That's what I was going to say. William Holden is your favorite classic film actor. Is he in that top three?
It's of that generation. It's him and Montgomery Clift. Because I think in my head, I don't, as much as it would make sense to say Paul Newman in my brain is still a modern actor. You know what I mean? Because I feel like he did just as much in like the 80s and 90s as he did in like the 60s and 70s. Oh, same thing with Redford. You know what I mean?
The Color of Money has a lot to do with that. Out of Africa has a lot to do with that.
Well, yeah. I mean, you had The Verdict. He was in a lot of movies.
Even putting him and Montgomery Clift in the same window is
weird.
And yeah, like one died 20 years before the other. But
exactly,
that's the nature of Hollywood back then, I suppose.
And same thing with Redford. I think of him as a modern actor. I don't think of him as like an old timey actor.
Yeah. I said I should bring up my man to compete with your man. But the only rugged person that I could think of that could possibly compare is Sean Bean. But I realize that I have blinders when it comes to Sean Bean. So.
Yeah. But like I said, any wonderful things that people are going to say about Montgomery Clift, I'm going to be like, I absolutely agree with you. Because he was beautiful and he's one of the greatest actors. And I feel the same way about, they did what they did and they do it so well. And I feel that way. I watched Top Gun Maverick over the weekend, and Tom Cruise for me is very old school movie star in that kind of a way. I don't think of him as an actor in the sense of like Daniel Day-Lewis or DiCaprio, De Niro, Al Pacino, you know what I mean? Dustin Hoffman. I don't think of him as like one of those actors. I think of him as a movie star. And you know what though? What Tom Cruise, and I agree with everything that everyone says about his personal life. Like I am on board with that. However, there are certain things that Tom Cruise brings to a film that not many people can do. So, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the star power. I mean,
what he brings, no one does it better. I'm not saying he can do a ton, but what he does, like Maverick.
Well, something like Tropic Thunder. He comes in and does his little moment, little dance and steals the show kind of thing. But the way I feel like William Holden kind of had those things as his career went on. And the difference between the actor in the 50s could also be a celebrity at the time. I said to you before we started, like when John Wayne shows up on Maude.
He was so California and so Hollywood. And I think that's one of the reasons that makes it different, because you have actors like Paul Newman, who, as you know, in all these Hollywood movies, yet he lives in Connecticut. You know what I mean? He lived with his wife on the East Coast. He wasn't in all the gossip magazines, you know?
That's what I mean. Today, half of it is about the celebrity, as opposed to in the 50s, somebody could be a celebrity. They could appear in some of the magazines or shows or make guest appearances or cameos, but it was still, there was this allure about them.
Yeah, because they were movie stars.
Where everything is social media and pap strolls, which I don't think, you know, I don't know.
We know more about them.
Maybe
now.
William Holden would have been like Sean Penn and like punched a few people what they got in their face.
I can see that.
You've been good. You've been very critic. I know sometimes we go off the rails and start giggly. You know, well, I do anyway, or I get, teased because I love the mess. But you know, you've put out some very good critical thoughts. Watch more William Holden movies. And what did you write recently? You said you were doing it in session.
I did a review of Women Talking, and I'm about to put out a review of Seriously Red.
Ooh, okay. And you are
an interesting, fun little movie.
Thomasson 11 was your Twitter, where you were answering some of those responses in your William Holden discourse.
Yes. So if anybody has any questions or comments, please. I love it. I love hearing people's opinions. Yeah, it makes you feel less alone in the world. It's like,
yes.
Yay, I love Stalag 17. I thought my dad and I and my ex-husband were the only people who ever watched that movie.
I'm at Therefore Review on Twitter. You know, I love when, yes, we get responses from things like, yay, people are talking. I just want to talk about movies. We're here to just get it out. We have opinions about movies that we want to share. We want to hear other opinions too. Even, I don't want to say if they're bad, but hey, that's all fair too. InSessionFilm.com is where you can find some of the articles we've written. I think I wrote about some retro comedies last. I don't even remember. And you can support our podcast as well on Patreon and see our flagship podcast on YouTube. At In Session Film is where they are tweeting. It was really nice, yes, when we had that last tweet about our last episode blew up a little bit. That was always wonderful to see. I have no idea what that actually means in the grand scheme of things, but that's okay. If we have listeners out there, thank you. We love hearing your thoughts, your shares, your likes, your love. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you at the next Women in Session.
Put a little spring in your step with great savings rates from Andrews Federal Credit Union. From now through March 31st, you'll earn 3.75% APY on your savings when you open our 3-month Spring Forward Share Certificate. Start with as little as $1,000 and watch it grow. Open your new share certificate at Andrews Federal and spring forward towards your savings goals. Get started now at andrewsfcu.org. Andrews Federal Credit Union, federally insured by NCUA, APY equals annual percentage yield. For eligibility and membership requirements, visit andrewsfcu.org.